Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the startling realities of climbing the corporate ladder and what it literally takes to build real organizational bench strength. We often think of corporate advancement as this straightforward, triumphant march straight to the top. But the data and the actual psychology behind it tell a completely different, much more perilous story. So let's dive right in and uncover the hidden crisis happening inside our companies. Think about the last time a colleague scored a major promotion. There were probably handshakes all around, congratulatory emails, maybe even a nice dinner. But why is it that corporate promotions often feel like jumping into shark-infested waters? We have this celebratory myth that moving up is purely a joyous occasion, right? Yet underneath that shiny surface, there's a stark, sometimes terrifying psychological reality. Because for the newly promoted manager, stepping into a brand new leadership role can feel way less like a victory lap and a lot more like a desperate fight for survival in a completely foreign environment. And this isn't just an individual struggle, it's a massive, macro business crisis. Check out this data from an RHR International survey. Half of the companies surveyed reported that they expect to lose 50% or more of their senior managers in a very short window. Let that sink in for a second. Half of the top leadership just gone. That is a staggering departure rate, and it leaves these massive voids at the absolute highest levels of our organizations. The flow in the leadership pipeline hasn't just slowed down. In a lot of places, it has dropped to a complete trickle. So, how are companies reacting to this? Well, in a total panic. 60% of organizations expect to hire at least a quarter of their senior leaders from the outside. They're frantically looking externally to plug these massive gaps. But here's the critical problem with that. Research actually shows that external hires are much less likely to be successful than internal promotions. That's especially true in volatile industries or companies with really deeply rooted cultures. We're seeing this incredibly risky reliance on external talent simply because companies just haven't prepared their own people. To solve this today, we're going to follow a clear map. We'll look at the empty pipeline, the promotion paradox, pathways and crossroads, the let go, preserve, add on framework, and finally, how to actually support this transition. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the empty leadership pipeline. Drawing from the text, Filling the Leadership Pipeline, edited by Robert B. Kaiser, a pretty shocking statistic jumps out. Only 25% of companies are highly confident in their ability to meet future growth needs with their internal high potentials. Why is that? Well, because historically, talent development has been treated as this short-term side project, not a strategic core way of doing business. In fact, over half of the companies surveyed had only been formally identifying and developing their future leaders for less than 3 years. The pipeline is completely empty because, honestly, we simply haven't been doing the long-term work required to fill it. Moving right along to Section 2, the promotion paradox. Okay, to really understand why climbing the ladder is so incredibly difficult, we have to talk about the 3 C's. In their old, familiar roles, managers develop competence. That competence breeds confidence. And together, they create a very deep sense of comfort. People naturally love the good feelings and the social reinforcement that come with this cycle. In fact, they kind of become psychologically addicted to these 3 C's. But here's the ultimate paradox. An upward transition brutally strips all these comforts away. The manager is suddenly thrust into a new role where their old skills just don't work, completely robbing them of their psychic anchors. The internal reality of this shift is just dramatically overlooked. Because they're stripped of their familiar public roles, managers often feel totally adrift, isolated and alone. According to Dr. Arthur Friedman, these managers frequently describe feeling empty and without purpose or value. Many secretly feel like absolute frauds who have somehow deceived themselves and the exact people who just promoted them. This is a genuinely powerful emotional loss, but because it's masked beneath a polished professional exterior, we almost never talk about it. So, how do most organizations respond to this profound psychological crisis? Well, traditional corporate environments often just abandon newly promoted managers. They operate on this incredibly flawed logic that smart people will just magically figure it out on their own. But as we just learned, the manager is completely out of their comfort zone. They are literally grieving the loss of their old competence. Leaving them alone to just sink or swim is a terribly inefficient talent management strategy that practically guarantees organizational disruption. This brings us to Section 3, Pathways and Crossroads. Notice the visual hierarchy of these crossing points. They aren't smooth, easy curves, are they? They are sharp, 135-degree discontinuous shifts. This perfectly captures the reality that moving to the next level isn't just about doing more of what you were already doing. It requires an abrupt, radical shift in direction and behavior. We're talking about 4 massive jumps here, from individual contributor to supervisor, all the way up to an institutional leader or CEO. At every single level along this journey, a manager simply cannot recycle the skills that made them successful yesterday. Let's dive into Section 4, Let Go, Preserve, and Add On. This brings us to the tripartite challenge. The absolute biggest mistake people make is thinking a promotion just means getting a bigger toolbox. It doesn't. To move forward, managers must consciously shed their old skills. They have to decide what anachronistic habits to let go of, what useful core competencies to preserve, and what entirely new behaviors they need to add on. Let's really contrast the 2 toughest parts of this challenge. Letting go means discarding familiar, highly successful skills. This is genuinely experienced as a process of mourning and grief, because you're losing your habitual sources of social reinforcement. On the flip side, adding on means acquiring totally unprecedented, disconnected skills. Because you're starting from scratch, it often feels, as one manager put it, awkward and embarrassing. You're basically trading your confident expertise for a clumsy beginner status, and man, that is terrifying for an ambitious high achiever. Now, this right here is absolutely crucial. We have got to normalize the learning curve dip. Managers expect their progress after a promotion to be this perfectly straight upward trend line. But real-life learning isn't a straight line at all. It's a parabola. There is an initial, totally inevitable dip in performance as the individual struggles to acquire the absolute basics of their new role. And this dip, it causes massive anxiety. If we don't tell managers to expect this dip beforehand, they will panic, they'll regress back to their old comfortable habits, and they'll end up micromanaging their teams instead of actually leading them. Finally, Section 5, Supporting the Transition. So, here are some highly practical techniques to stop that behavioral regression in its tracks. First up, mentoring. Senior managers need to share their own personal stories of withdrawal and how they personally struggled to let go of old skills. This normalizes the grief. Second, action learning. Put managers on ad hoc teams to solve novel business problems, so they're forced to adopt alternative perspectives before they ever get officially promoted. And third, coaching with a psychologist. Because managers often won't admit they're struggling publicly, a psychologically oriented coach provides a safe, confidential space to work through the intense emotional turmoil of the transition. On a systemic level, you really need an architecture of support. That means having visible role models and truly integrated career planning. It means offering early developmental assignments and, critically, establishing support groups where managers can openly admit that what got them here definitely won't keep them here. These systemic actions give managers the psychological safety to properly grieve their outmoded roles and confidently step into their new ones. Which leaves us with a final, absolutely critical question to think about. Is your organization blindly relying on the sink or swim mentality for its future leaders? We've seen today that simply throwing a high performer into the deep end is a guaranteed recipe for psychological distress and organizational failure. Building a true leadership pipeline requires deep empathy for the emotional realities of letting go and a serious structural commitment to helping your people navigate those tough crossroads. Think about the high potentials in your organization right now. Are you truly preparing them for the leap, or are you just hoping they somehow learn how to swim?